do you know what is considered to be the single greatest feat of man-made architecture in the history of mankind? That would be the Great Wall of China. I remember back in school learning about the Great Wall, and I still remember some things about it. I refreshed my memory with some research this past week. I remember being told back in school how it took over 2,000 years to complete from beginning to the end. It extends over 13,000 miles, or it did at one point. And I remember learning in school that it holds the distinction of being the only man-made structure that is visible from outer space. Interestingly, since then, I learned that the wall is actually not visible from outer space, but the other two facts are correct, so I guess 2 out of 3 ain't bad from the public school teacher way back when. But as I refreshed my memory of the wall, I learned that the initial purpose of this wall was for protection from enemy nations from the north. And the wall also served a convenient purpose by forcing tariffs to be imposed on goods that were imported, since you had to pass them through the wall to get into the China. You could only do so after they allowed you in by paying the tax. There's other famous walls that we are certainly familiar with. The Berlin Wall, or what's left of it nowadays. The Western Wall in Jerusalem, also known as the Wailing Wall. And there's even Hadrian's Wall, which may be lesser known, but this is on the border between England and Scotland that was built a long time ago. The thing about walls is that the attention is usually focused on the wall itself. Whether you're trying to keep people out, as in the case of most walls, or sometimes even trying to keep people in by building a wall, which is sort of what ended up happening in the case of China with the Great Wall of China. But this morning we'll look at a chapter in the Bible where God promises his people that one day they will live in a city without man-made walls. And furthermore, they are going to be safer than they've ever been because God himself will serve as that wall for them. So we'll get to it and read chapter 2 from Zechariah. This is a rather short chapter. There's 13 verses, but it doesn't take long to get through this at all. Reading from the English Standard Version, beginning in verse 1. And I lifted my eyes and saw, and behold, a man with a measuring line in his hand. Then I said, Where are you going? And he said to me, To measure Jerusalem, to see what is its width and what is its length. And behold, the angel who talked with me came forward, and another angel came forward to meet him, and said to him, Run, say to that young man, Jerusalem shall be inhabited as villages without walls, because of the magnitude of people and livestock in it. And I will be to her a wall of fire all around, declares the Lord, and I will be the glory in her midst. Up, up, flee from the land of the north, declares the Lord, for I have spread you abroad as the four winds of the heavens, declares the Lord. Up, escape to Zion, you who dwell with the daughter of Babylon. For thus says the Lord of hosts, after his glory sent me to the nations who plundered you. For he who touches you touches the apple of his eye. Behold, I will shake my hand over them, and they shall become plunder for those who serve them. Then you will know that the Lord of hosts has sent me. Sing and rejoice, O daughter of Zion, for behold, I come, and I will dwell in your midst, declares the Lord. And many nations shall join themselves to the Lord in that day, and shall be my people. And I will dwell in your midst, and you shall know that the Lord of hosts has sent me to you. As the Lord will inherit Judah as his portion in the Holy Land, and will again choose Jerusalem. Be silent, all flesh, before the Lord, for he has roused himself from his holy dwelling. May the Lord's blessing be added to the reading and to the hearing of his holy word. When we hear this the first time, it may not strike you as an especially encouraging passage, But for those who traveled a long way from Babylon back to their homeland and experienced the hardships that they certainly did while trying to build a life in a new land in Israel, these are actually pretty encouraging words. You see, it's the most difficult times in our lives when we yearn to hear from God. We just want a message from him. And that is certainly part of the reason why God chose to send this message to Zechariah for his people during that time. He wanted to let them know that they were not alone, that God was with them, and that he has a plan that involves them. Whereas these words were accepted in a very literal sense to Zechariah and his people, for Christians here in the 21st century, we can still accept them in a rather literal sense, since we're still awaiting that day when we will experience this city without walls that God speaks of. But furthermore, as with many things, we can learn even more about God by taking his words somewhat symbolically as well and applying them in a different way. What I mean is that all throughout the Bible, the word Babylon, the city of Babylon, is viewed as an evil city. And as a matter of fact, if you look up the word Babylon in the dictionary, it'll say something like the accepted definition is a reference to any rich and magnificent city believed to be a place of excessive luxury and wickedness. So therefore, you could theoretically have a conversation or an exchange with another person where that person says, hey, by the way, next month I'm going on vacation out to Las Vegas and on vacation. And you could reply and you say, oh, really? Well, why would you want to go to that Babylon, for instance? You could say it, and that would be proper to say so, because the name of that ancient city has become synonymous with wickedness. Babylon pops up in prophecies in the Bible left and right. The book of Revelation has a bunch of them, and it's hard to read through Zechariah without making some of these connections to the symbolism that we see in the book of Revelation too. We can sort of see where the connection was made with John when he received that image as well. For instance, in Revelation, John tells us that Babylon will be the center of worldwide anti-Christian, anti-God government that will rule the entire world. And Revelation also talks about nations from the north planning an attack on Israel and carrying out that attack. And here we have similar symbols of wickedness in Babylon and from the enemies of the north. So when we go back to Zechariah and read verse 6, it says, flee from the north. And in verse 7, you who dwell in the daughter of Babylon. So those symbols keep popping up here and there. I think the initial receivers of this prophecy would understand these words symbolically as well, since they already left Babylon, so why are you telling them to go and leave Babylon? That doesn't make a lot of sense. So they certainly would have taken it in the other symbolic sense that we're speaking about here. And the same goes for us here. In our modern day, we need to always be mindful of our ways and the things that we do and how that reflects on Christ and on God and on the church and on us personally. And it's just telling us, stop engaging in sin. Flee Babylon. Get out of the north. Those kind of things. It goes on to say one day, God himself will act as a wall of fire to protect them from their enemies. And he foretells of a day when Jerusalem will be so populated that it won't be able to contain the multitudes of people and the livestock that they have together. So the obvious question that I come up with when I read this is, well, if it hasn't happened yet, when's it going to happen? And I think the answer to that is that we have seen somewhat of a partial fulfillment, but not a complete fulfillment yet. For instance, from the days of Zechariah, the population of Jerusalem increased from the time they came back from Babylon up until the days of Jesus, and then the Jews were dispersed once again. And it wasn't until Israel was officially recognized as a sovereign nation in 1948 that time will only tell if what is currently happening there is that actual final complete fulfillment or just another partial one. And what I mean to illustrate that is with a graph here that should hopefully is rather simple to understand. 1948, they got their independence. So in 1950, they say there were about 120,000 people there. In the 70 years since then, up to 2020, they say that the population is now about 930,000. Back in 1950, 120,000, that's like a city about the size of Allentown, Pennsylvania, to be local about it here. So in 70 years, it doubled, and then it doubled, and it has almost doubled a third time in 70 years. So that's quite some population growth going on, and it's still increasing. So God's message to Zechariah is to encourage his people by giving them the knowledge that he has a plan and that he is working out this plan in their midst. Now, think a minute about the walls that we build. And we look for certain things in a wall. We want a sturdy structure. Take your home walls, for instance. We don't want walls to get cracked. That can allow things in that we want to keep out, like letting pests, precipitation, or rain. You don't want it raining inside. Keeping burglars out, too. That's pretty obvious as well. And walls provide support for the ceiling. So you don't want cracked walls and unsturdy walls compromising our safety, because then your roof falls in on you. Then there's walls that nations build for national security, for instance. These walls serve as a form of defense, like the Great Wall of China we talked about. The thing is that when we are always focused on the walls themselves, that detracts from what is going on inside the walls. And in a fallen world like ours, it's always necessary to some extent to be focused on those walls. You want to maintain them, make sure they're working properly, all that, but it's just the world that we live in. It's always going to take time and energy and effort from other things that we want to protect. So what this is really about is about God's kingdom, and it's about appreciating God's presence in our lives. So I ask you, what would it take for any of us here to more fully appreciate and experience God in our lives and to do more for God and his kingdom? What would it take? We know that the enemy is trying to attack our walls of protection that we've constructed personally and otherwise. And he knows that the more time we spend on fending off his attacks, the less time we have to do God's work. So at this point, I'm now talking about symbolic walls that we build in our lives. For instance, we've each built certain walls in response to the coronavirus this year, walls that we didn't have in our lives before then. Even, for instance, even though I've determined maybe I'm comfortable with doing this or that, whether it's wearing a mask, going to a store, doing whatever, going back to work, I'm comfortable with doing this, but when I go out and be around other people, maybe I build another wall there, because now I'm concerned about the people around me. Is the guy over there in the Walmart or wherever I'm at, is he going to get mad and flip out on me if I get too close when I reach down to grab a can of soup off the shelf? Or what about a woman who pushed her cart past me and, maybe she let out a cough even though she has a mask on? Does she have the virus now? Am I going to catch it because that close proximity? And not just the virus, race relations going on at the forefront of everyone's mind. Do we now have to measure every word that we say? Is it now racist to say, well, let's call a spade a spade? Well, I've heard some people saying that's a racist remark now because spades are black. Or take time off. Don't be a slave to your job. Can I say that anymore? Some people are actually saying you can't even refer to the biggest room in your house as the master bedroom because of the master-slave relationship. I actually saw this week in an article. And baseball is starting up finally, yay. And if a player gets off to a slow start, are we going to say, well, he better start hitting soon or else he'll have to face the lynch mob? Can I say lynch mob anymore? You know, we keep building more and more walls in our lives to guard against these things, whether we find some of them legitimate or some rather ridiculous. The fact is, all of this plays into the enemy's hands all along. Doing God's work is the last thing he wants us to be doing. So he wants us to be busy building walls and maintaining and monitoring these walls. So I ask you again, what would it take for you to experience God better? I know we can all experience him more because no one is ever maxed out in the sense, myself included. I've gotten all I can from God and I can't get a bit more. No, nobody can say that. We know that God isn't the problem in the relationship, so it's got to be something in our lives, something that's getting in the way of that relationship. Would it require you trusting him more than you already do? Would it require you getting past the loss of a loved one in your life? Maybe there's some animosity towards God taking this person from me. Would it require letting go of a grudge or hurt feelings from someone that you love? Or is it some kind of a secret, unconfessed sin in your life that you just struggle with? Sin is always that wedge that will be driven between us and God. So for each of us, it's something different. And would it help you to draw near to God if you knew that a brother or a sister in the faith is daily lifting you up to God in prayer and reminding you that you're not alone in this fight? It seems to me that it is endemic to the human condition to cling to things that are not beneficial to us. We do it all the time. Sometimes it's an issue of comfort, while at other times it's an issue of fear, or it could be a number of other things. I remember back when I was little, riding a tricycle, and I had really a bicycle with training wheels, I should say. And I got rather attached to these training wheels. Training wheels were the best invention ever when you're 5 years old, by the way. And I thought, wow, these are great. Why don't the big bikes have these? You know, they'll never fall over. Well, it didn't matter to me that the big kids didn't have 2 extra wheels. I wanted those 2 extra wheels regardless, and I didn't know if it made me seem like a baby or not. I do remember that the day that my dad took the training wheels off, he made it very clear he was not going to put these on. He said, if you want these off, they're not going back on. And of course, in time, I learned to not like that decision on his behalf, but it turned out to be what I needed, because that's what I needed to do to ride a regular bicycle. My attachment to training wheels is like our attachment to things in this life that just hold us back. When I was learning to ride a bike with training wheels, I didn't realize that I could go more places and I could get there a lot faster once they were removed. Training wheels don't work so well on stone. They don't work well on grass. They don't work well on packed down sand at the beach. In hindsight, I can see now, looking back, that what kept me back was my fear. It was fear of falling. And once I got past that fear, then there was nothing holding me back. I get them training wheels off and I'm out of here. I didn't realize at the time I was clinging to something that was severely slowing my progress. And that's how it is with these walls that we build quite often. Again, some of them are necessary. We all have things that we need to defend against in our lives, but every time it requires time and energy that could be used elsewhere in our lives. And for me, I take comfort in knowing that we are in such a better position now here in the 21st century than they were in the 6th century BC with Zechariah. Looking forward, they were looking forward to Jesus. We're here looking back at Jesus, and we already know what he's done for us. We have that benefit that they didn't have in the 6th century, that when that prophecy was given, the veil in the temple had not been torn yet. There was still a certain limited separation between God and man, but the crucifixion that happened, now that was the cataclysmic event that changed everything. It was when the veil was torn from top to bottom, and when Jesus was on the cross, he said, "It is finished." So when the message from Zechariah says that the glory of God will be in their midst, we can experience that so much more now than we could 2,500 or so years ago, all because of the work Jesus has done in the meantime. And it's something we shouldn't take for granted, because the writer of the book of Hebrews tells us, "Let us then with confidence draw near to the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in the time of need." We don't need to wait for a certain time of the year. We don't need for a certain priest to come and intervene for us. We have direct access to God's throne, just us. No intermediaries, nothing. So in many ways, the world concentrates on walls, and as I said, sometimes it's necessary, but we still can't afford to be lax about our security and safety, knowing that we have walls. So in a spiritual sense, the world's focus is on walls, which is just a metaphor of these things that we can control. I can build that wall, and I'm going to monitor that and make sure it works right. Something's harassing me over here, so I'm just going to build a wall to take care of that. And something over there, well, let me go and do that. And what's the focus on? It's on me and what I can do. The next thing we know, we're so busy building these walls, we haven't accomplished much of anything for the kingdom of God. And we've boxed ourselves in with a bunch of walls. When you're a child of God, you experience some of God's protection and God's glory more so than 520 BC, around about when this prophecy was given. But we still have more to go. We haven't experienced God to the extent we will in eternity, and that is yet to come. We're just sort of in an intermediate position here, knowing, yeah, we've taken a couple steps, but there's still steps to go. And it is such a privilege to be able to draw near to God, because it's only through his love that he allows us to boldly approach his throne of grace. So it should go without saying, but the wall of God is certainly not anywhere near a man-made structure. Look at the Great Wall of China again, to bring that up once more. It's a remarkable achievement by man, it really is. But today, about 1/3 of the wall is missing. It has either been destroyed by warring nations, or it has simply eroded and worn away. The things of this world are not built to last, but the things of God are eternal. And the Great Wall of China contrasts with God's protective wall of fire. Do you think God's wall of fire is ever going to erode or waste away or allow an enemy through? Of course not, because he's not of this world, and he is the creator of all this stuff. When you experience Jesus as Lord of your life, he revitalizes your spirit as he becomes the center of your life. We no longer should be concerned with the walls that we are building in our lives, because he is now our defense. He is our wall of fire. And it's only when you truly trust him and turn your life over to him that you can fully explore the innermost parts of your life now with confidence and without fear that the enemy is going to be attacking you. When God's the center of your life, you become less concerned with the limits you have placed on your life, and you are now allowed to explore the expanded territory God has given to you. So it contrasts with the fact that those who don't follow Christ, they're the ones who are not secure. And they're the ones who are constantly monitoring the walls that they built in their lives, and because they simply haven't put trust in God to do that for them. The true believers, on the other hand, are the ones that have put their trust in God. They exercise a broader focus by relying on God. And I just imagine what the church could accomplish if more church members would realize that we have such great freedom in Christ that we probably don't even realize. And therefore, we don't have to be as concerned with these barriers that we've built up along the way. So in closing, I urge you to pay less attention to the walls of your life and start exploring these innermost parts more so, because that's where we really explore and experience the love of God. Once you experience that, it's like a key that unlocks all these other doors in your life, doors that you didn't even know was there. And the love allows you to serve God to a greater extent than you ever thought was possible. And if anyone here feels uncomfortable or maybe even unsure of your relationship with God, I encourage you to take the first step out of your comfort zone and first of all, put your trust in God. And once your trust is placed in Him, the next step is to move away from the walls, start exploring inside, go inward, seeking God with all your heart, and that's where you will find God. And you will experience acceptance and love and grace like you have never known. Let's close now with a word of prayer.